we believe in limited government under the Constitution. And we know we're not having that, not much of that. And the education system is one of the important pinnacles that has been sort of taken over. And now Sam Blumenfeld is very much a mentor of mine. I've known Sam since 1988. Used to hear him on the Gene Burns show. Remember the old
Yes, I
AM
do.
Gene
Love
Burns?
him,
Yeah,
yes.
that was the Thinking Man's radio station, right?
Yeah.
And I got to become a very good friend of Sam. And we traveled throughout New England and I think New York on various speaking engagements. He's a World War II veteran, 87 years young, and he's authored almost 15 books. He's got another book he just finished. He actually gave me a manuscript of a book that Camp Constitution Press hopes to publish that he wrote in the early 60s. He was the author of the Blumenfeld Education Letter. It's out of print, but if you go to my script page, you will get every single one of them in a PDF format. Incredible good stuff. I think his best book was the NEA, Trojan Horse in American Education. He's also written this very important alphaphonics book, How to Teach Anybody How to Read Phonetically. Children, even adults who have never learned how to read properly. And I taught all of my wife and I, all of our children how to read with this. You see, we don't, and I'm quoting Sam, you don't need puppets popping out of trash cans to teach children how to read. You know? So, with further ado, let's give Sam a warm welcome. Sam.
Thank you. Thanks, Hal. Thanks, Hal. I hope you won't mind if I sit down. At 87, you have aches and creaks, you know, that sort of thing. But the good thing about being as old as I am and still alive is that I know how things were back in the old days. For example, when I was going to school back in New York City, in the first grade in the New York public schools, I was taught to read with phonics. Everybody learned to read. There was no such thing as reading disability, no such thing as dyslexia, no such thing as ADD, no such thing as ADHD, you know. And incidentally, we not only were taught to read phonetically, but we were taught to write cursively. You know cursive writing, the difference between manuscript and cursive? And we were told how to hold a pen. Today, people hold a pen like this, like a fist, you know. And that's very bad for the fingers. You can't write very much in that way. And so pains were taken to teach us in a manner that had been perfected over hundreds of years of experience. And all of that was done away with by the progressives, the so-called progressives. And everything that's in the schools today is there deliberately. Nothing in public education today happens accidentally. Nothing. And if they tell you that the reason why they're having problems in the schools is because there's not enough money, that's one of the biggest lies that's being told to the American public. Because all they want to do is to milk you to continue to pay for failure. Now, as I said, nothing happens accidentally. It's deliberate. The plan to dumb down America was made in 1898 by John Dewey, the most evil man that America has produced. Now, he's considered a god among the liberals, but he was evil. You know why? Because he decided, he concocted a plan to dumb down the entire nation. That's a crime. That's a crime to plan to dumb down an entire nation. And he did it because that was the only way that they could change America into a socialist system. They had to dumb us all down first. And it's all here. A friend of mine took the article that was published in 1898 in the one of the magazines, and he reproduced it because it's very hard to find this plan. When they talk about John Dewey, they don't tell you about the plan. They tell you about other things, philosophy and ethics and all of that, but they don't tell you about the plan to dumb down America. They don't want you to know that. As a matter of fact, what is the heart of the plan? How do you dumb down a nation? You change the way reading is taught in the schools. You get away from the phonics method, which teaches children to read our language phonetically, which enhances brain power, expands vocabulary, and enhances the use of the brain. And they change it to the look-say method that teaches children to read English as if it were Chinese. They have to memorize little words. They have to memorize the words. They call that a sight vocabulary. Now, if you want to find out if your child is being taught by the phonics method or the sight method, all you have to do is go to the primary school, the first grade, and ask the teacher, do you teach phonics? Oh, they all say, yes, yes, we teach phonics. Yeah, they teach a couple of letter sounds. But then the real question you must ask is, do you teach a sight vocabulary? And they'll say, of course. We give the children lists of words that they have to memorize before they even know the sounds of the letters. And do you know what that does? That creates a sight reflex, a picture reflex in the brain, and that becomes an obstacle to seeing the phonetic structure of our words. And that reflex, because it's automatic, and creates this obstacle against seeing the phonetic structure of our words, creates dyslexia. Dyslexia. And I can prove it to you very simply. Let me first read you a few lines from a speech I gave recently. I wrote, the planned deliberate dumbing down of America was started in 1898 by socialist John Dewey with his attack on the primary school's emphasis on teaching children to read. This emphasis sustained the capitalistic, individualistic system, and it produced high literacy whereby the average American could read anything and think for himself. That's the way it was back in those days. You could think for yourself. Dewey wrote in an essay entitled The Primary School Fetish, this is it, quote, the plea for the predominance of learning to read in early school life because of the great importance attaching to literacy seems to me a perversion. How do you like that? It's a perversion, this emphasis on literacy. He goes on, no one can clearly set before himself the vivacity and persistency of the child's motor instincts at this period, and then call to mind the continued grind of reading and writing without feeling that the justification of our present curriculum is psychologically impossible. It is simply superstition. It is a remnant of an outgrown period of history, unquote. What Dewey deliberately ignored was the tremendous language learning faculty that every child is born with, and that teaching a child to read at that early age expands the child's mastery of language, which is the key to academic success. You all know how children learn to speak their own language, virtually, a couple of weeks after birth, they start mumbling and bumbling, and by the time they're 5 years old, they have a speaking vocabulary in the thousands of words, They're very intelligent. You know, these little children feel intelligent because they're learning to speak their language without the help of a certified teacher. They're doing it all by themselves. Isn't that amazing? So they feel very intelligent. But then when they get into a public school and they're taught to read by the look-say method, and they can't learn to read that way, they begin to feel stupid. They begin to feel that they have a learning disability. They don't have a learning disability. It's the teacher who has a teaching disability, you see. Anyway, a different way of teaching reading had to be developed that would lower the literacy level of the American people. Dewey and his socialist colleagues were determined to change individualistic America into a collectivist society. Dewey got his egalitarian utopian ideas from Edward Bellamy's book, a novel, Looking Backward, a fantasy of a socialist America in the year 2000. The book is still being read today in American universities. Dewey's plan required that a new educational curriculum should be developed and tested in private experimental schools before being put in the public schools. He wrote, quote, "After such schools have worked out carefully and definitely the subject matter of a new curriculum, finding the right place for language studies and placing them in their right perspective, the problems of the more general educational reform will be immensely simplified and facilitated." Now, all of this was being planned by a self-appointed group of socialists who call themselves progressives. They knew that what they were doing was subversive and treasonous. Indeed, Dewey wrote, and this is in the essay he wrote, he said, "Change must come gradually. To force it unduly would compromise its final success by favoring a violent reaction." Well, if what they were planning was so great, why would it cause a violent reaction? Mm-hmm. Because people don't want to live under socialism. As we've seen in the last 100 years, with all of the experiments in communist Russia and Cuba, I mean, they have egalitarianism in Cuba. Everybody is poor, you know. So they have egalitarianism. That's what Looking Backward said we ought to have in America too. And if the changes were so beneficial to American children and society, why would they favor a violent reaction? Obviously, the dumbing down plan would have to be imposed by stealth, deceit, and lies. You see, you have been lied to by the educators since they began this project. The progressives have lied to you, and they will continue to lie to you today, tomorrow, and until they are eliminated, gotten rid of. Now, and that is why no progressive educator can be trusted. They have been told to lie in order to bring about their socialist scheme in our schools. Did they know that their new teaching methods would create reading disability and dyslexia? They found out pretty early at the expense of 4 of the richest boys in America. Believe it or not, John D. Rockefeller Jr. was a great admirer of John Dewey, and he put his 4 sons, Nelson, David, Lawrence, and Winthrop, in the Lincoln School, one of the experimental schools called for by Dewey. Rockefeller donated over $3 million, which is worth God knows how many today. This is in 1920 dollars. donated $3 million to the Lincoln School. The result? All 4 boys became dyslexic. But of course that didn't stop the progressives from implementing their plan. So they saw that it created dyslexia. And that's what they wanted. They said, this is perfect. We're producing, even the richest boys in America can't read now, you know. Incidentally, when Nelson was governor of New York, he wrote in the reading teacher of March 1972, quote, I appreciate the opportunity to make some observations on the importance of reading, for I am a prime example of one who has had to struggle with the handicap of being a poor reader while serving in public office. Can you imagine that? A functional illiterate is governor of the state of New York, and he could have been president too, you know. He writes, on many occasions upon confronting an audience, I have elected to announce that I have thrown away my speech in favor of giving the audience the benefit of my spontaneous thoughts. And usually I have added, besides, I went to a progressive school and don't read very well anyhow. So he knew that school had causes dyslexia. This, of course, this is him speaking. He says, this, of course, is a trial to my very able speechwriter, as well as a libel upon all the devoted teachers and professors who saw me through the years of my formal education. You see, he's not capable of criticizing these teachers who turned him into a dyslexic. You see, he can't do that. Because if he did that, that would make headlines. He goes on, he says, it is also usually a rather popular device to communicate with the audience on a much more intimate basis, but the truth is that it serves primarily to cover the fact that I really wish I could do a better job of reading a speech or other public statement. Millions of American illiterates do the same thing every day in America. They do everything in their power to hide their illiteracy. And they're very clever. They devise all sorts of names. I know of one illiterate who used to carry a newspaper under his arm all the time to give the impression that he could read, you know. And that was his statement. Well, as you know, Nelson Rockefeller was vice president under Ford. In other words, a functional illiterate was a heartbeat from becoming president. Now, David Rockefeller, the great banker, in his memoirs he writes, quote, it was Lincoln's experimental curriculum and method of instruction that distinguished it from all other New York schools of the time. Father was an ardent and generous supporter of John Dewey's educational methods and school reform efforts. Teachers College of Columbia University operated Lincoln with considerable financial assistance in the early years from the General Education Board, that is the Rockefeller Foundation, as an experimental school designed to put Dewey's philosophy into practice. Lincoln stressed freedom for children to learn and to play an active role in their own education. But there were some drawbacks. In my case, I had trouble with reading and spelling, which my teachers, drawing upon progressive educational theory, did not consider significant. They believed I was simply a slow reader and that I would develop at my own pace. In reality, I have dyslexia, which was never diagnosed and never received remedial attention. Can you imagine that one of the richest men in America can't afford remedial tutoring. As a result, my reading ability as well as my proficiency in spelling improved only marginally as I grew older. All my siblings, except Babs and John, had dyslexia to a degree. Babs and John went to a regular school, so they never became dyslexic. But all the boys in the Dewey School became dyslexic. But you see, there's something strange that goes on in the minds of these people. They cannot attribute evil to what has been done to them. They cannot look at those teachers who are so sweet and so kind and say they are evil because they have destroyed my ability to read. And even today, one of the reasons why people like Bill Gates and his wife spend all this money trying to reform education, they never talk about the reading problem. Why? Because they cannot believe that teaching professionals would deliberately create reading disability. It's just beyond their belief. In other words, it's easier to believe a credible lie than an incredible truth. It's simply incredible to believe that the entire education system is devoted to destroying the brain power of the American people. They can't believe it. So they assume that there's something wrong with the kids. It's the kids' fault. They're not smart enough, they're not brought up well enough, maybe the parents are not raising them well enough. It's the kids' fault. The kids develop attention deficit disorder, ADD, and what is our solution for that problem? Drug the little bastards. Drug them. So now the pharmaceutical industry is involved in maintaining the fiction, maintaining this lie, this deception, that it's the kid's fault and the parents' fault and not the educator's fault. That's why it's so important for what I am doing and trying to bring to you this knowledge that it's planned. And the plan has worked out very nicely. Let me, for example, here's a magazine some of you may have heard of. It's called Collier's. Do you remember Collier's magazine? It was like Life magazine. It was or Saturday Evening Post. Here's an article, 1954. Why don't they teach my child to read? And explains exactly what the problem is. Reveals the differences between the look-say method, the Dick and Jane method, and the phonetic method. The magazine does it all. 1954. A year later, Dr. Rudolph Flesch came out with his book, Why Johnny Can't Read. Do you remember that book? What did he say in that book? He said the reason why Johnny can't read is because they're not teaching him to read in the proper phonetic way. It's as simple as that. In other words, if we want to cure America's educational problems overnight, all they would have to do is get my book and teach every kindergarten, first grader to read with alpha phonics. That would do it. It's very simple. The cure is so simple, that's why nobody can believe it. You know, it reminds me of back in the days when surgery was pretty primitive, and the surgery would be very successful, but then the patient would die of an infection. And they didn't know why this was happening. Well, I think it was one Lister or Pasteur who said, was it Lister or Pasteur?
Lister, yeah.
Said that the reason why they're getting infected is because you have dirty hands. In other words, all they had to do was wash their hands. Simple solution to a horrible problem. Well, it's the same with our educational problem today. You see, if they taught every child to read with phonics in the first grade, then they have to get rid of the whole dumbing down system because the kids will be able to read. And they're not going to sit there and read all of this garbage that they're being given by the schools these days. You know, all these books on global warming, you know. They'll be able to read history and science and every good book, just as I was when I was going to school. You know, when I learned to read, I haunted the library. My parents were immigrants from Poland. They had no education. There was no library at our home. You know, no book reading. My mother was illiterate, so I found the world in the public library. So literacy opens you up to the world. But now they have this Common Core business. And the purpose of Common Core is to train children for the workforce. For the workforce. They talk nothing about the reading problem. They know we have a reading problem, but of course they know that it's the fault of the kids, you know. And they know that the solution is Ritalin or Adderall or something like that. So they all know that the system has to be reformed because the failure of the system is so obvious. This was published in 1954. U.S. News and World Report was talking about school reform in 1996. Dumb and Dumber. So everybody's talking about how dumbed down we are. And they all think it's because Americans are getting dumber. No, it's because the schools are making us dumber. And in fact, we get up to 1993, that's, what is this? This is 96. 90 million Americans, adults, can barely read or write. 90 million. This is a survey done by the government. 90 million Americans can barely read or write. And what's their solution? The Common Core. Increase the standards. Make the standards more difficult. Well, if you can't read, what good are the standards? You know, what you need are good programs, not good standards. I mean, we had standards back in the days when I was going to school. I mean, it was so obvious. The standard was to create a literate human being, and we knew how to do it. It was no big mystery. Last night I was watching something on TV about teaching. There was this special on CBS trying to encourage young people to teach. And there were a lot of scenes of today's classrooms. And I've never seen anything messier, more chaotic than today's classrooms. Kids are seated around tables, they're talking to one another. The teacher is no longer a teacher. She is now a facilitator. She facilitates. She goes around the room, and kids are all doing their own things, or they're doing nothing. I remember when I was in Australia, where they have this system, this chaotic system. I visited this first grade classroom, and they've adopted everything that we've done wrong. Everything. And they have a reading problem in Australia just as we have. And also in New Zealand. And also in Britain. Because the English-speaking world is under assault by the progressives to turn us all into socialists, to destroy the capitalist system. Now, the reason why that capitalism is still endured is because there are enough people who can read in America. 20% of the American people are highly literate. 20%. That's enough to keep this country going. 20%. But you can imagine how much better it would be if 99% were operating at that same level of literacy. 99%, wow. But you see, many of the large corporations, like the Rockefellers and the Carnegie people, they wanted workers in their factories. You know, at the turn of the century, you had the Industrial Revolution, and suddenly there was a need for all of these workers. And they said, hey, we don't need any more poets. We don't need any more philosophers. We need workers. So let's train the kids to be workers. So it worked very nicely with Dewey's idea. Don't make highly literate people, because highly literate people are independent. They may not like working in your factory unless you pay them enough. See, that's the beauty of independence. To be intellectually independent is that you can choose what kind of a career you want. But if you've been sufficiently dumbed down and can't read, you'll take any job you can get. See, that's what they want. So now, the Common Core thing, they say, well, this plan has worked out to a certain extent, but the people are too dumb now. We've just made them too dumb. So we've got to smarten them up a little bit. Just enough so that they can get in this high-tech workforce. You see, the technology has created new conditions. This is not the Industrial Revolution anymore. We don't have these kind of factories where, you know, people sit around. We outsource that. You know, in Mexico and in India, in China, now Bangladesh. You know, you look at the labels in your clothes, they're coming from some of the strangest places in the on the planet where they're manufactured. You want a good idea of how well socialism works? Look at Venezuela today. They have food shortages there. They can't even get toilet paper in Venezuela. It's that bad. You know, if you destroy the manufacturer of toilet paper, what are you going to use? I guess you're going to use the newspaper, you know. But that's, I mean, and we know what socialism does to people. I mean, we've had even Russia finally got rid of communism. I mean, they have an authoritarian type of government today, but it's no longer communism. And in fact, I listened to one commentator who was comparing Obama, who is a socialist, by the way, and there's a very good book on him, on his socialism. It's called The Radical President or something like that, in which he gives the entire socialistic background of Obama. Obama's mother hated America, you know, and he got his hatred of this country from her. And when he and his wife took over, they wanted to continue changing America. Well, America had been so dumbed down that they elected them into office. And now so many people are on the federal dole. Even the Boston bombers were living off the taxpayer. From day one, the day they landed, to the day they finished bombing the marathon. And where is the security that we have? 9/11, we have this, what is it, the NSA, that's supposed to be monitoring everybody on Earth. And yet they let 19 of the hijackers fly all over America, rent cars, stay in hotels, take flying lessons, and they couldn't put two and two together. And I remember reading about one of the airline clerks at Logan Airport. When this guy came to his desk for his boarding pass, he looked at this guy and he said, "That's not good." But he dared not stop him. because they were afraid of being sued, you know. So he got on board that plane. He killed not only everybody on the plane, but plowed into the Trade Center in New York and killed about 3,000 people. You know, the 4 hijacking planes. They got away with that. Can you imagine? This was a plan that was in operation for months and months, and these guys were traveling all over and taking flying lessons, and our country didn't have a clue. And then what about the bombers in Boston? You know, a year and a half before the bombings took place, there was a horrible murder in Waltham, the town where I live. 3 young men in their early 30s were killed. This occurred on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. They had their throats slit. It was in an apartment. They were all into marijuana. They had their throats slit, almost decapitated. $5,000 was thrown all over the place. Marijuana was thrown all over the place. And when the bodies were discovered by one of the girlfriends, and she screamed when she saw this mess. And each body was in a different room, by the way, which showed that the person who did it knew the people there and had access to the apartment. Well, it turned out that one of the men who was murdered was the best friend of the Boston bomber. The best friend. And our government had been warned about him by the Russians. The Russians warned us about that man. And it turns out that he was responsible for the murder of those 3 men in Waltham. Well, you know what the Waltham police said? Oh, this is a drug job. You know, this is just an ordinary, you know, little quarrel over drugs. The intelligence of our people in charge is worse than it's ever been. They're not intelligent. They don't use their minds. They don't analyze anything. I mean, why are they collecting millions of phone calls and phone numbers and all of that? They don't know what to do with them when they have them. They say that they've prevented terrorist attacks, but they don't tell us which ones have been prevented. The ones that we know were prevented were done by people on airplanes, like the shoe bomber or the underwear bomber in Detroit, and a few others like that were done by and the Times Square one. Here was a car in Times Square loaded with explosives, and the man was a street vendor who saw smoke coming out of the car and stopped that conflagration. So the people in charge, in the Obama administration, you've got rank amateurs running the United States of America, and they're running us to the ground. I mean, this man, he lies through his teeth. He talked about a red line for Syria. You all heard that? He mentioned it several. Now he says, oh, I never said red line. The world said red line, you know. I guess he's preparing to make some kind of a decision. We don't know what kind of a decision he's going to make. But he may very well start World War III. We don't know. This guy hasn't a clue. Why? Do you know what his profession was before he became a state senator? He was a community organizer. You have to be a socialist in order to be a community organizer, because that whole job was created by Saul Alinsky, the communist in Chicago, who said you need community organizers to politicize the illiterates, politicize the underclass. You see, that's why he won the election. Obama knew how to get the underclass, the illiterates, to the polling booths. He gave them free cell phones, he gave them money. God knows what else, what kind of gifts were given to these people, because these people generally are not interested in politics. I mean, they've been dumbed down beyond belief. I mean, they're idiots. And we support them now, you know, all on the dole. And it's the 45% of working Americans who are now paying for all of this. Because in the last election, it was shown that the majority, which includes the dumbed down, the illiterates, and the underclass, now are in the majority. And if you get them to the polls, and as a community organizer, that was Obama's job in Chicago. So he was a professional community organizer in Chicago, and he applied those same techniques when he became president. That's why he's continually campaigning. You know, he's always in a campaign mode. He's never being presidential. He's being a candidate all the time, raising money. As a matter of fact, he had to forego a new fundraising stint in California. I can't understand why anyone would give this guy a dime. But it shows you that not only have the dumb gotten dumber, but the smart have gotten dumber. And we also know that from the SAT scores. Because if you look at the SAT scores, the number of people, the number of students who now score at the highest level is half of what it was, say, in 1970. And the number who score at the bottom has doubled. So the smart are getting dumber, and the dumb are getting dumber. And all of this is contrived by John Dewey and friends, and of course it's going on today and will continue as long as the American people tolerate it. Now, what can we do about it? I've just completed writing a new book, which I hope will be published soon. The title of the book is How Liberal Utopians Have Turned Public Education into a Criminal Enterprise. If that doesn't wake up people, I don't know what will. But you see, we also have to awaken us smart people. You know, we've got to be moving, because they are taking this country away from us faster than we can stop them. You know, that's the problem. And how do we organize to stop them? Well, one of the ways, of course, is to join the John Birch Society. I have to say that, you know, for Hal. But another way, of course, is to get those people out of Congress. You see, there are 500, I think it's 535 people. The President, the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the Supreme Court, who rule 300 million people. And they are doing the lousiest job possible. I mean, I can't think of a dumber crowd than those who now run America. Take, for example, Markey. Have you heard of Markey, the congressman who was elected senator? Here's a guy who was he ran an ice cream truck, I think, or his father did, or something like that. But he's a senator now. I mean, we've got nitwits there. and also ideological nitwits. I enjoy watching some of these on C-SPAN, some of these congressional hearings. And take, for example, look at the IRS. The IRS has become a political organization. They're not interested in you as a taxpayer. They're only interested in creating socialism. So she takes the Fifth Amendment. The woman in charge who is responsible for doing all of this damage to the Tea Party people, she takes the Fifth Amendment. How can that be? How can that be permitted? She's a public servant. That ought not to be permitted. And that's because we permitted the unionization of public employees. That's one of the worst mistakes ever made in America. And it was the Kennedy administration that got it started. And the reason why John Kennedy permitted unionization of federal employees was because he got union help in running for president. That's what we're up against. In any case, get my book when it's published. I list all of the crimes being permitted by the educators. 1, the deliberate plan to dumb down America is a crime. First of all, it weakens the American people. It weakens the nation. And of course, there's that famous statement that was made by that if we had done this to ourselves, we would call it an act of war. The Nation at Risk report said that. So we've done it to ourselves. So John Dewey imposed a plan to dumb down his own nation. That's a crime. Then they deliberately create dyslexia. That's a crime. That's child abuse, to destroy a child's ability to learn to read. That's a crime. Then they also create this ADD and ADHD. Why does a child become ADD? Because if they can't learn to read, they act up in the classroom. And when they act up in the classroom, they're told by the teacher, we've got to drug your child or he can't attend school. That's a crime to do that to children. Child abuse is a crime. Then they also contribute to the delinquency of minors with pornographic sex education, giving out condoms in schools. You don't think that contributes, that tells the kids to use them? And that contributes to the delinquency of minors. It contributes to unwed motherhood, pregnancies, abortions. What are these poor girls doing, And of course, their lives are ruined if they're going to have a child out of wedlock. And what about the boys? What are they guilty of? They're guilty also of delinquent behavior. So the schools create delinquency. They create child abuse. They create dyslexia. They dumb down the nation. That's a criminal system. The whole system is criminal from top to bottom. And as John Dewey said, change must come gradually. To force it unduly would compromise its final success by favoring a violent reaction. Do not accept their lies any longer. Do not accept their deception. Do not be deceived by them any longer. The system is lying to you from top to bottom, and the only way to, first of all, get your kids out of the system. If you put your kids in the system, they will suffer. And there's no reason for them to suffer. That's why I have promoted the homeschool movement. And now we have about 2 million kids now being homeschooled in America. And they're all learning, many of them are learning to read with alphaphonics. So tell your parents, tell your friends and your relatives what's going on. Tell them that this is all planned. It's not an accident. And if we want to stop it, we have to do it one at a time. Now, in America, the best way to do it is to organize. The other side is organized. They're well organized. But our side is not. We're divided. And that's one of the reasons why we keep losing. So we have to join those organizations that at least can make a difference. Join the Tea Party movement. Join the homeschool movement. Join those aspects of American society that still are resisting this particular drive towards socialism, because we're almost there. We're almost there. Well, thank you for your attention. You've been a great audience. Thank you.